The sun stood still. I prayed a prayer no man had dared. I told the sun to stop in the sky. And it did. But the real miracle wasn't the sun. It was God's faithfulness in my weakness.
Welcome to Testament Unspoken, where we bring biblical stories to life through the eyes of those who lived them. Each episode offers a raw, first-person perspective on some of the most powerful figures in Scripture, told with emotion, honesty, and depth. Please subscribe for more stories like this.
My name is Joshua. I was born a slave in Egypt. My first cries were heard not in freedom, but under the crack of whips. I learned to walk, carrying mud for bricks that built Pharaoh's empire. My childhood lullabies were the groans of my people, crying out to a God we could not yet see. I knew the taste of dust in my teeth, the weight of chains on my wrists, the sound of men collapsing under labor too heavy to bear. The Egyptians made the children of Israel serve with rigor, and they made their lives bitter with hard bondage, in mortar and brick and in all manner of service in the field. Exodus 1:13-14. But I died a free man in Canaan. I breathed my last in the land promised to our fathers. My feet stood on soil Abraham once walked, land Isaac once dreamed of, land Jacob once longed for. The boy born in slavery became a man who tasted God's promises fulfilled. Between those two moments, the mud pits of Egypt and the hills of Canaan, I walked behind Moses. I was his servant, his shadow, his soldier. I saw his staff split seas and strike rocks. I watched him climb mountains wrapped in fire and descend with a face glowing like the sun. I heard him speak with God as a man speaks with a friend. I, too, heard the voice of God. Not once, not twice, but again and again. Sometimes thunderous, shaking the skies. Sometimes a whisper that burned deeper than fire. His voice told me when to march, when to wait, when to draw my sword, and when to fall on my knees. I carried the weight of battles. I raised my sword against Amalek, against kings of Canaan, against cities walled high into the heavens. My hands grew stained with sweat, with dust, with blood. But every time we fought, I learned the same truth. The battle was never mine. And I bore the burden of leading a people stiff-necked and restless, a people who sang when the waters parted and cursed when their throats grew dry, a people who rejoiced when manna fell and rebelled when their cravings returned. To lead them was to walk always between their grumbling and God's wrath, between their fears and his promises. So let me confess to you, leadership was never easy. Courage was not always in me. Many nights I trembled, many mornings I doubted. I questioned whether I was enough, whether my strength could carry us another step. And when I stood where Moses once stood, the weight felt unbearable. But this I know, every victory we won was not mine. Every wall that fell, every enemy that fled, every inheritance we claimed, it was not by my hand, nor by the sword, nor by the shout of the people. It was the Lord, always the Lord. I was born in Egypt, born a slave. The first sounds I remember were not songs of joy, but the groans of my people under Pharaoh's yoke. My earliest memories are of dust and sweat, of clay, and straw pressed into my small hands. Before I was old enough to lift a sword, I was taught to lift bricks. We built cities not our own. We labored for treasures we would never touch. Every sunrise meant another day of groaning, every sunset another night of weariness. Mothers hushed their children's cries, with whispers of a God they barely remembered, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the God who had promised land but had given us Egypt instead. I watched men collapse in the fields, their backs striped by whips. I saw women clutch their sons close when soldiers marched by, for Pharaoh had decreed death upon our little boys. Egypt's river, the Nile, ran with our sorrow. And yet, even in those dark days, something stirred among us. My mother told me, "Joshua, the God of our fathers has not forgotten us. He hears, he sees, he will come." So I grew up between two worlds, the world of chains I could see and the world of promise I could only imagine. Then I heard his name spoken again on the lips of a man we had long forgotten, Moses. He had fled Egypt years before, but he returned with fire in his eyes and a staff in his hand. He spoke of freedom. He spoke of a God who had heard our cries. He demanded Pharaoh let us go. Then Moses came, old, trembling, tongue slow. But his staff struck fear into Pharaoh. I watched plagues tear through Egypt. I saw the Nile turn to blood. I saw the sun hide its face. I saw death pass over our homes and enter the houses of Egypt. And when Pharaoh mocked, the land itself shook. I was young, but I will never forget the sight of Egypt unraveling, the Nile turning to blood, frogs covering the ground, darkness swallowing the sun, cattle dead in the fields, firstborn sons gone in a single night. But in our houses, the blood of the Lamb marked the doorposts. Death passed over. I still remember the silence of that night, heavy, waiting, trembling. And then the wails of Egypt rose at midnight, loud and unending. But in our homes, there was life. That was the night I learned. We were slaves to Pharaoh, yes, but not forgotten by God. He had remembered his covenant. He had come to deliver. When Moses returned, Egypt shook. I had heard the elders whisper his name, the man raised in Pharaoh's house, the one who killed an Egyptian, the one who fled into the desert. But when he came back, he did not come in his own strength. He came with the strength of the Lord. I stood among the crowds as he raised his staff and declared the words of God. "Let my people go." Pharaoh laughed, but the Lord was not mocked. I saw the Nile turn red as blood. I saw frogs swarm the land, flies fill the air, hail shatter the fields, darkness blot out the sun. Each time Pharaoh hardened his heart, each time he pressed us deeper into despair, but each time the Lord pressed harder, until even Egypt's gods were bowed low in humiliation. And then, the night of death, the Passover. We marked our doors with the blood of lambs, trembling as midnight drew near. I held my breath as silence fell heavy on the land. And then, the wails began. The cries of Egypt tore through the night as death passed over their houses and entered their chambers, but not ours. In our homes, where the blood covered us, there was life. I will never forget that night. I will never forget the terror of waiting, the smell of lamb's blood on the wood, the sound of weeping in the distance, and the realization that God himself was moving through Egypt. By dawn, Pharaoh let us go. We left in haste, bread unleavened, belongings wrapped in cloaks, children clinging to their mothers' skirts. I walked with thousands of others, my heart pounding, my eyes scanning the horizon, hardly believing we were finally free. But freedom was not easy. Pharaoh's fury followed. His chariots thundered behind us, and the sea blocked our way ahead. The people cried out in terror. Some shouted to return to Egypt. Fear clawed at my chest, but Moses lifted his staff. "Do not be afraid. Stand still and see the salvation of the Lord, which he will accomplish for you today." Exodus 14:13. The wind howled, the waters rose. Walls of sea stood on either side, towering, glittering in the moonlight. And the ground where water had lain moments before, was dry beneath our feet. I stepped onto that seabed with trembling legs, waves roaring on my right and on my left. Children clung to their parents, carts rattled, sheep bleated in fear. But we walked. We walked because God himself had made a way. And then I walked through the sea. Walls of water rose on either side, and the ground beneath my feet was dry. I ran between those walls, and I knew our God was not a story. He was alive. He was leading us. So the children of Israel went into the midst of the sea on the dry ground, and the waters were a wall to them on their right hand and on their left. Exodus 14:22. And when the last of us crossed, when Moses stretched his staff once more, the waters collapsed. Pharaoh's armies, the might of Egypt, swallowed in a single breath. The sea covered them, and their cries were silenced forever. That night we sang. Our voices rose like fire in the desert air. Moses led and Miriam danced with tambourines, and I, Joshua, sang until my throat burned. The Lord is my strength and my song. He has become my salvation. Exodus 15:2. That was the day I knew. The God of Abraham was not a tale, not a memory, not a hope alone. He was real. He was powerful. He was with us. And I resolved in my heart, wherever he led, I would follow. My first battle was in Rephidim, against Amalek. I had never commanded an army. I was no general, just a slave son with a sword in my hand. Until then, my hands had only known the weight of bricks, the pull of ropes, the plow in the earth. But that day I was given a sword, a weapon unfamiliar, heavy, biting into my palm as though it knew I was no soldier. The Amalekites came upon us fierce and merciless. Desert raiders, hardened men who struck without warning, who preyed on the weak, who circled us like wolves around weary sheep. They came for our stragglers, for our women, for our children trailing at the edges of the camp. My blood burned. My fear rose like fire in my throat. Moses looked at me, his eyes calm, steady, the eyes of a man who had faced Pharaoh himself. He said only, "Choose some men. Go out. Fight. Choose some men. Go out. Fight with Amalek. Tomorrow I will stand on the top of the hill with the staff of God in my hand." Exodus 17:9. Fight. The word cut deeper than the sword in my hand. I was no general. I had no training. And yet, I could not refuse. Obedience was all we had. So I gathered men, slaves like me, farmers, shepherds, craftsmen, men with trembling hands and hearts pounding as mine did. We stood shoulder to shoulder, blades shaking, eyes fixed on the dust rising in the distance. When the clash came, it was like thunder. Their cries split the air, their swords hammered against ours. I swung and parried, my arms screaming with effort. Dust blinded me, sweat stung my eyes, and blood, and theirs and ours, darkened the ground. At first we faltered. At first I feared we would break and scatter like dry leaves in the wind. But then something changed, and I looked up. On the hill stood Moses, staff raised high toward heaven. His arms lifted like a banner, and when his arms rose, strength filled us. We pressed forward. Our blades found their mark. My heart steadied. So it was, when Moses held up his hand, that Israel prevailed. And when he let down his hand, Amalek prevailed. Exodus 17:11. But when his arms wavered, when the staff dipped, I felt it. The weight shift, the tide turn. Amalek pressed us back, their shouts fierce in our ears. I tasted dust as I stumbled, nearly cut down. Then I saw Aaron and Hur beside him, lifting his arms, steadying the staff when he grew weary. So his hands were steady until the going down of the sun. Exodus 17:12. And again the tide turned. Our strength returned. We drove them back. That was the moment I learned the victory was not in my sword. It was not in the skill of my hand or the courage of my men. It was in the outstretched hands of a prophet calling on the Lord of hosts. By sunset, Amalek fled. The field was ours. My body sagged with exhaustion, my sword heavy as stone, my clothes torn and stained. But my heart burned with a truth that has never left me. The Lord is my banner. Exodus 17:15. The battle belongs to the Lord, always. But Moses lifted the staff of God on the hill, and as long as his arms were raised, we prevailed. When his arms dropped, we faltered. I learned then the battle was never ours. Victory was held not in the sword, but in God's outstretched hand. I climbed Sinai with Moses. I stood at the mountain's edge as fire and thunder shook the skies. I heard the trumpet blast of heaven. But when we descended, my heart broke. The people, our people, dancing before a golden calf, calling it their god. My stomach twisted. I could not understand how a people who saw the sea part could bow to a lifeless idol. That was when I learned the greatest enemy was not the nations around us. It was the faithlessness within us. Moses sent 12 of us to spy the land. I saw the fruit. Clusters so large 2 men carried them on a pole. I saw cities walled high into the heavens. I saw giants. 10 of us came back with fear. They spoke of our weakness. They spoke of impossibility. But Caleb and I, we spoke of promise. "The Lord is with us," we cried. "Do not fear them." But the people would not listen. They lifted stones to kill us. That night I realized sometimes faith will make you stand alone, even among your own people. For 40 years I buried my brothers. One by one, graves marked the wilderness until a generation was gone. I buried friends who once dreamed of freedom, but died in sand because they doubted. I lived with the weight of waiting for a promise that felt distant. But God had said it, and his word is never broken. When Moses died, my knees buckled. How could I lead where he had led? How could I carry a people who had tested even him? But God spoke to me, "Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go." Those words, they carried me more than any sword or shield. I led our people to the Jordan. The river raged, swollen with flood. But as the priests stepped in with the ark, the waters halted. We crossed on dry ground again. Stones were lifted from the riverbed and set as a memorial. 12 stones to remind us, the Lord makes a way where there is none. Then Jericho, a city strong, gates barred, walls unshakable. I waited for the Lord's command, and his command was to march, to walk in silence for 6 days, and on the 7th, to shout. It sounded like madness. But obedience is not about understanding. Obedience is about trust. And when the trumpet sounded, when our voices lifted, the ground shook. The walls collapsed like dust before the wind, and Jericho was ours. But not every victory was clean. At Ai we were struck down. I fell to the ground and cried out, "Why, Lord?" And he revealed the sin in our camp. One man's hidden greed had cost us all. I learned that holiness is not optional for God's people. His presence cannot dwell where sin is cherished. In battle against the Amorites, I prayed a prayer no man had prayed before. "Sun, stand still!" When the Lord listened, the sun halted in the sky, the day stretched, and we struck down our enemies. I learned then, there is no limit to what God can do when faith dares to ask. I grew old dividing the land, tribe by tribe. It was not glamorous. It was not war or fire. It was order, inheritance, the slow work of establishing roots. But every line drawn, every boundary marked was a testimony the Lord keeps his promises. He had sworn to Abraham, and now the land lay beneath our feet. In my final days I gathered Israel. My voice cracked with age, but my heart burned with fire. "Choose this day whom you will serve," I told them. "But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord." That was my confession, my legacy. Not battles won, not cities conquered, but a life anchored to the God who never failed me. I was born a slave. I died a free man. I saw seas part. I saw walls crumble. I saw the sun stand still. But above all, I saw a God who is faithful, a God who fights for his people, a God who asks only this: be strong, be courageous, trust me. My name is Joshua, and this is my confession.
If you found meaning in these stories, don't forget to share them with others and subscribe to the channel. Your support is highly appreciated. Thank you. Hit the notification button.